All right, welcome to Spooked by Spending Plans. This is the third webinar in the academic year of 2023-2024 Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. We're going to be talking about budgeting today. My name is Andrew Pellegrini. I run the University of Illinois Systems Student Money Management Center. Nikki Giancola Shanks is from IDFPR, but she helped with our slides, but she's unable to join us today, but we want to give a shout out to her. We also have some colleagues in the chat who are helping with links, and so Corbena is helping with some of the links, and we also have Steve who's helping just monitor some of the chat. But Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, my name is Emily Harmon. I am a family consumer science educator with Illinois Extension. I serve Champaign, Florida, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties as well as across the state. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Emily. So we also want to kind of get an idea of who is logging on with us today. So I'm going to launch a poll. And we kind of want to know your age, some demographics about you. And this also helps Emily to maintain funding through University of Illinois Extension. They have a responsibility to do some outreach across the state. And so knowing who's logging on will help them maintain some of their funding. So we'll leave that open for just a couple more seconds. We got about half of participants that have responded so far. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. It looks like we have a wide distribution of age ranges. We have students and full-time employees. We have some retired and part-time folks as well. We have mainly females here today, but that's okay. We're also got a large distribution for ethnicity and race. So we'll stop sharing. If it's still showing the demographics, you can exit out of that poll box and you should be able to see our learning objectives. So we're planning to cover lots of different topics related to budgeting. We are going to help you identify some of our spending needs or priorities, give you some strategies for that. We're also going to talk about resources to help leverage in a spending plan or a budget. We're going to discuss goal setting and some methods for that. We're also going to be talking about tracking expenses as well as your progress towards goals. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about our behavior and how that plays a role in our spending choices. And then we're also going to describe a few ways to reprioritize some of your spending behaviors to meet your changing needs. So we also have another poll, because this is the name of this webinar is Spooked by Spending Plans, right? We want to identify what some of our fears are and help you address those. So if you want to identify some of your financial fears, you can choose multiple options. Maybe budgets make you feel trapped or restricted. It's common to think of personal finances as complicated, and they are complicated, which gives a lot of people some anxiety about them, especially with the amount of changes that are happening to financial services. There's new services and risks that pop up all the time. A lot of people are afraid if they pay too much attention, they're be more aware of how hopeless it feels to reach your goals, but we can talk about strategies to overcome that, or being aware that there's not enough money based on what the spending choices are or how you're restricted. Sometimes it can feel isolating to make a budget or spending plan, especially if you are comparing yourself to others. We live in a world where social media plays a big role in how we view the world, the lens in which we view our own struggles and other people's struggles. So that can also be isolating. Not being able to keep up with your friends or your family can also be a fear around finances, and not being able to afford emergencies, and just having any type of spending plan might give you math anxiety. That's pretty common, especially in the United States. So it looks like everyone here has some kind of financial fear that falls in these categories. If you think of another financial fear that you would like us to address or you want to think about as we move through this, you can go ahead and put in the chat if you're comfortable with that. We also have a Q&A feature that gives you a little bit of anonymity, so you don't have to disclose your financial fears to everybody else. But if you want to disclose to the co-hosts, you can. But we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about what spending plans are. In order to visualize your spending plan and turn it into a reality, there are a few concepts that we need to kind of go over. All right, so the word budget usually makes people feel restricted or trapped, and that can be kind of scary. So we want you to think about budgets as a perspective shift to spending plans. So if budget makes you uncomfortable, we want you to shift to thinking about things as a spending plan where you are taking control of your finances and developing a goal-focused strategy to address some of your spending priorities. So where budgets have historically been thought of as prescriptive and unforgiving, your spending plan should be flexible. If you have priorities or goals or resources and expenditures that change, so should your spending plan. Same with your budget, but a spending plan that using that verb or vernacular might help you better identify that as an empowering perspective when it comes to deciding where your money goes. Some potential resources for your budget can include your normal salary or hourly pay, but it can also include things like community services, gifts like from holidays or family members or birthdays, and it can also include government assistance. All these things can include can be considered income or resources that you can leverage for your budget. So when we think about income, it can include your wages like we just talked about, but it can also include scholarships or investments, other types of financial aid. And we'll talk a little bit about how financial aid is one of those things when you're a student that can be a little bit challenging. You also might think about government assistance. There are lots of Americans that use government assistance programs to cover things like healthcare, food and education costs through the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program or SNAP. But it's not always something that we think about when we're creating a budget, but these can be really helpful for accomplishing our goals and meeting basic needs. So being aware of them is pretty critical to making an efficient budget if you're eligible to use them. So SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, can help millions of low-income individuals and families meet their food needs every year. You can also qualify for financial aid for school through the FAFSA, and that can help lower student loan costs as well as healthcare programs like Medicaid that can help lower your healthcare expenses as well. But navigating government assistance can be kind of challenging. Not everybody qualifies for assistance, but you can use usa.gov/benefits to learn more about how to qualify or exploring what you might be eligible to qualify for. So like I mentioned earlier, student loans is a special type of financial aid income. This is a type of income that you want to minimize because it is a debt and it does have to be repaid later. We're re-entering repayment of federal student loans after a 3.5-year hiatus. So this is on a lot of people's minds, especially borrowers that are re-entering repayment. You don't want to rely on student loan forgiveness to magically wipe away all of your student loan debt, because it might not happen. And a lot of the student loan forgiveness programs that are out there are kind of misunderstood. So you want to make sure that you understand what forgiveness you are eligible for based on your career trajectory and what your loan types are. So if you want to learn more about student loans and repayment options, you can watch our student loan management webinar or register for our student loan updates webinar series, which we have every month through March this particular academic year. All right, so there are many community resources that are available to you, no matter where you live. It does differ, obviously, based on your geographic location, if you're in a more urban area versus a suburban or rural area. Libraries, for instance, are really great resources for professional development or education, even entertainment, like checking out books or music or movies, or even internet access if that's what you need, all for free. So libraries are a really great community resource. If you have public transportation, take advantage of it. When looking at your budget, consider costs of owning a car versus using lower cost transportation options like using the mass transit system, like the bus system, even if it's just for a few things, like you can lower parking costs if you do own a car by using public transportation in Champaign-Urbana, for instance. You can also look for other resources within your community by using 211.org. That's a website. Or you can call 211 to get more information about resources that exist within your community. Additionally, cooperative extension offices are located throughout the nation and have community educators that take information from universities like ours and share that with the communities that they serve, like what Emily does. So this is a great resource for learning as well. And they have educators throughout the state to help on a wide variety of things like money mentors, master gardeners, and 4-H programs. So sometimes resources can be a surprise, just like expenses can be a surprise. So you might have birthday money or holiday resources. And while you can't count on this in your monthly budget, if you receive a monetary gift, it can help you advance a goal or contribute to a savings expense or pay off a debt. So those are different ways to think about it. You might also check unclaimed.org to see where you can get any unclaimed money that you might be owed that you don't know about. And there's also other things like inheritance, which comes with its own complications sometimes, especially if it's emotionally charged. All right, so there's been a lot of research on income volatility over the years, which is a term used to describe income dips and spikes over a relatively short period of time. Usually it's defined as a 25% or more change in income annually, but a lot of contract workers or hourly employees could describe income volatility by pay period or project. So for low income earners, even a 10% change could be pretty dramatic. Frequent income changes can cause a lot of anxiety, and sometimes budgeting increases awareness of that anxiety. But there are ways to cope with it, especially if you think broadly about the flexibility of your income and resources. So we put in the chat where the source of some of this income volatility research comes from as well. There's workers across many industries that experience at least occasional variance in income from month to month, but the most heavily impacted industries include leisure and hospitality, construction, and natural resources and mining. And that's from the Economic Well-Being of U.S. Households study done in 2020. All right, so when we're thinking about steps to financial security, you have a basis of healthy finances, including good credit, having a budget or maintaining a budget, and making sure your bills are paid on time. Once that foundation is kind of taken care of, then you can move to purchasing insurance to protect yourself against risk. Once that's kind of established, you have some insurance in place, you can start saving for emergencies. And once you have your emergency savings kind of built up, then you can move towards investing and home ownership, possibly, if that's a goal for you. But these are kind of the pillars of financial security that you can think about when building your budget. So another part of your spending plan or budget is thinking about your goals, and a big part of your goals is timing. So understanding the time horizon of different goals can be really helpful for understanding when to reprioritize things as they come up, right? So because most of us have more than one goal and the time frames may vary, prioritizing your goals when you create your spending plan is pretty important. You may need to readjust your goals as time frames change. A goal could be immediate, right? Could be that may be less than a year, could be within a few weeks. A goal could be near future, which would be 1 to 5 years from now. It could be intermediate, which usually is between 5 and 10 years for most financial planners. And then longer term is much further in the future, like 10 plus years. And because life is unpredictable, you might have to flip around some of your priorities or timelines. So thinking about these in chunks of time frames might help you in prioritizing your goals. All right, so let's say that you're going to set a goal for an emergency savings fund, and the potential goal is maybe you want to save between 3 and 9 months of essential expenses. This essential expenses typically refers to like your rent or mortgage, your normal utilities, average grocery costs. And you might be able to, if you get into a position where you have to dip into your emergency savings to cover an entire month of expenses, you may be able to negotiate some of your debt for longer term income losses. It's also important to make this a SMART goal. So maybe you start small with that goal. Maybe you identify a bank account across town to use. Maybe you make a milestone of reaching 3 months of essential expenses, and then you decide to keep going to 6 months and then to 9 months. And the save securely piece for this particular emergency savings goal is you want to have funds that are kind of liquid, that are easy to access, but you want to make sure that they are in a FDIC or NCUA insured financial institution. So this is just an example of a goal. Your goal might be different, but this gives you a little bit of an emergency savings goal identifying plan. All right, so when you are visualizing and setting your goals, you have to start with the goal, you visualize it, you research its costs, you look at your flexible spending and any extra income or resources that you might have, and then you decide what kind of timeline is best for you. We've used the SMART goal method to identify priorities in our spending plan. And here's kind of the framework for setting any type of goal, not just like fun activities or emergency savings goal, but you want to be specific. That's what the S stands for. You want it to be a measurable amount. This is pretty easy to do with a financial goal because usually it's an amount of money that you are trying to reach. If you have other people that are involved in the goal, you want to make sure that you agree on the specifics of the goal. You also want to make sure that it is realistic, considering your income, your expenses, and your other goals that you might have. And that's where negotiating your goals or reprioritizing your goals is important. And again, that timely piece, that time horizon of goals is very important for setting goals that you can actually achieve. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talk about understanding your expenses.
Oh yeah, thanks, Andrea. So I'm going to take a deeper dive into how we can categorize and prioritize our expenses. So by doing this, we can help to demystify some fears around feeling overwhelmed by financial obligations or personal finance decisions in general. So let's talk about needs versus wants. So everybody's needs and wants, they're going to differ depending on your situation. So when thinking about our needs, there are few basic things that we absolutely need, like food, clothing, water, shelter. All those things need to be taken care of. And sometimes you may even hear that referred to as essentials. So essentials needs, it can be the same thing. And And then as we are in college, right, we're a couple months in, it's October. So let's think about, are there temptations that you may be experiencing in college? If you already haven't experienced it, like there's this concert coming up and I didn't budget for it, or I don't know how I'm going to spend for it. It's super tempting, but let's think about what our needs are and do we have the money to want that? So just kind of think about that. So, and then to help us decide what we even need. So I'm saying food, water, shelter, those are things we absolutely need. Let's think about it like this. As you think through life, maybe try to slow down and think about the process of things and what you need. So let's say a smartphone is an example of something that you may need. Okay. A smartphone can be a luxury to some people, but if you have a job that needs you to have a smartphone, that's a need, because if you don't have that job, you don't have an income, you can't get your needs met. But for somebody who's retired, maybe that's not something you necessarily need. That may be a luxury. So it's a smartphone, it's the same situation, two different people, two different outcomes. So it's different for every situation, but kind of think through things that you need and decide what you need. And then on the screen here, we've listed out some types of expenses that you may have your own spending plan, or if you haven't created that spending plan yet, totally fine. These are things you may see in a future spending plan. So every person is going to have different expenses to consider, and there's also a ton of tools to help you better categorize what those expenses are. And we'll talk about those tools here in a minute. You can even dive into yourself. So if you are one of those people that do not have a spending plan yet, that is fine. A good starting point, if you're trying to create a spending plan and even identify your own expenses, is to look at your fixed expenses and needs so that you can prioritize those things first in your spending plan. So examples of your fixed expenses could be like lodging, or like your rent or your mortgage, healthcare, or savings. Those are things that you may absolutely need. So I just mentioned fixed expenses. So that's the part where we're going to dive down a little bit deeper and try to categorize what our expenses are. So I'm going to be talking about what fixed, flexible, and occasional expenses are. So a fixed expense is something that is constant. It's usually associated with a contract. So an example of this could be like your cell phone bill. So for some cell phone companies, you have to sign a contract to say, I'm going to pay my $100 cell phone bill monthly, whatever the time period is, but you're signing a contract saying you're going to do that. That kind of think of that as a fixed expense. A flexible expense is exactly how it sounds, right? This type of expense fluctuates over time and it's not constant. And then this is also a good place to start if you need to cut spending. So if you're finding that you're having trouble meeting your needs, look to see what your flexible expenses are and see if you can cut anywhere. And you can always add it back later, right? You don't have to cut it forever, but this is a good place to start. And then your occasional expenses, exactly how it sounds. Those are the ones that sneak up on you and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to pay that. I totally forgot about it, because they happen so regularly. So that could be things like your birthday gifts, vet visits, or other things like that. They just pop up. So going back to our types of expenses that we just showed a little bit ago, I actually went in and color coded these so we can talk about it. So your fixed expenses could be things like your rent or your mortgage, your savings goals. If you're making a commitment saying, I'm going to save $20 a month for the next year, that could be a fixed expense to yourself, right? And then transportation. So that could be things like car payments or rideshare contracts. You're signing something that says I'm paying this. And then health insurance premiums, that could be thought of as a fixed expense. But if we dive deeper into health insurance, it could honestly could be fixed or flexible, because if you break your arm, maybe you're not anticipating breaking your arm, so that's an unexpected thing. That could be flexible or occasional, right? Because you're not expecting it, but your health insurance premium, you know you're paying so much a month for health insurance. So looking at your variable or flexible expenses, things like food, pet food, utilities, transportation, maintenance. So that could be like if you need new tires or you need your oil change, things like that. And then also personal items. Those are all things that are flexible. And then I didn't talk about this earlier, but discretionary spending, that's things like non-essential items that are just nice to have, right? So we have like cable things like Netflix or Hulu, entertainment, vacations. That's another place that you can cut your spending as well, but it's worth mentioning so you can if you want to categorize your types of expenses. So on to cost of living. So if you didn't know, different states, different locations, they have different living expenses, and sometimes it costs more to live certain places. So there are a variety of factors that determine the cost of living. I actually, my sister just actually moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and she really wanted to live somewhere in Colorado. It was more, she looked up the cost of living, she did her due diligence before she moved, and she saw that it costs more to live in Colorado than it did Wyoming. So she decided to live in Wyoming right now, and then her future end goal is to go over to Colorado. But she looked it up because she didn't know that there was such a difference between the two states. And she decided for right now, let's live in Wyoming. But she looked it up to decide to make that decision for herself. So we kind of broke that down here into the 3 U of I system campuses. So Urbana-Champaign, Chicago, and Springfield. And so we found that if you're looking at the chart, that a 1-bedroom apartment on the Champaign campus costs about $750. Chicago, it's almost $3,000, and in Springfield, it's a little over $700. So this is just all to say that the cost of living, it costs different in different places, but we can potentially budget for these things to help us make future move choices, career choices, things like that. And we just put in the chat a calculator from Bankrate where you can actually go do this to explore different cities. So how do we keep track of all the things? How do we organize? I'm a type A person, so I'm like, let's get it organized. So there are a variety of methods that you can use, and I'm going to briefly overview some of these, but essentially for you as the individual, it's just really important for you to research and do your due diligence and choose whatever tracking method is that you are the most comfortable with. But so some of the ones that I'm going to mention are starting first with the envelope system. This is a very common one. A lot of people know what the envelope system is, and when you see it, it's generally what it is. But the idea behind this is that when you put cash for each category of expenses for the month into an envelope, and you spend from that envelope, and you're not supposed to spend over that envelope. So you can't take things out of other envelopes. This could be considered like a paper system, but if you like the envelope method and you want to do it digitally, there's also systems out there for you to utilize as well. Then there are also other electronic methods like phone apps. So there's a whole variety of phone apps, and I'm sure we all can name or think of some or name some right now. But also these phone apps may originate from websites as well. So if phone apps aren't your thing, look to see if it's a website where you can log into your computer and just do it from there. And then there's financial institutions. So explore to see if your bank has any of these budgeting or spending plan tracking expense options to where it's embedded into your banking app or your financial institution website or something like that. And then there's the calendar option. As I go through life, I didn't realize this was a form of budgeting, and I'm even doing this on a very small scale. But the calendar option, this is just essentially where you write down like what your expenses are when things are due. So like your phone bill could be due on the 15th. I'm going to put that in my calendar. I get paid on the 16th. I'm going to put that in my calendar. So just tracking everything and putting in a calendar view so you can visually see what's going on. And lastly, there's the tried and true pen and paper method. So those could be like the old school check registers or transaction registers, index cards, notebook, pencil, or bank statements. So like I said earlier, these are just some of the ways that you can do it. There are more ways that you can do it, but research and find one that works best for you. So now here comes the question. I want to ask everybody, if you've tracked your expenses before, how have you done it and has it worked for you? Or if it hasn't, tell us. So like I said, I use a couple different methods, but I utilize the calendar method so I know when all my bills are due.
So while
Yeah.
people are thinking in the chat, I do a combo of things. It used to be simpler. I used to just use an app. Most people know about mint.com. That's an app. It's a very popular app. There are other apps that do the same thing. I used to solely use that as my expense tracking and budgeting tool or spending planning tool. But then I got married and my life got more complicated. So I do a little bit of calendar, right? There's certain expenses that we both need to be aware of that I put a reminder in the calendar of. I also put my payday in the calendar and my husband's payday in the calendar. So we kind of know like when income is coming in. But I also now have to use an Excel spreadsheet or a Google spreadsheet to think about more longer term planning things. And then I still just use the app mostly for tracking expenses. Tracking expenses are so important, not just for understanding like where your spending categories may be, how to control 1 month when you're stress spending, but also if there's any identity theft issues, right? Someone gets a hold of your card information or your banking credentials. And so monitoring your spending is sometimes the only way to identify those things.
I see some other people saying Excel sheet, Google sheet. They use a financial service, bank apps, and yeah, a combo of things. I said the calendar method for myself, and then I also I use a system through my banking app. I just know that's just what I've used, and it's sustained me. So thank you everybody for sharing. So we are talking about how it can be daunting to track all of the expenses all at once if you've never done it before, just like it can be absolutely daunting to start an emergency savings, and they recommend 3 to 9 months of emergency savings is where you should be at. It's important to say to make and sustain healthy habits. So if tracking all of your expenses is totally anxiety producing for you, and it's just scary, start with tracking 1 expense or 2 expenses, whatever it is, and then you can keep building from that. So this may be a good starting point for some people if they get those like negative feelings just about trying to track their expenses. So for this example, we decided to track our grocery expenses. Okay, so just our 1 expense. So we started in October, and we're going through, and we've totaled so far that we spent almost $200 in groceries. And then we can go through it, and then maybe from this you can track more. You can start tracking your eating out, or how much you're spending in utilities or things like that. But it's okay to start out with one thing or 2 things instead of doing the whole shebang. And then also to add to the benefit of tracking expenses and why it's so important, tracking your expenses can also be thought of as a form of mindfulness too. So when you think about it, it makes sense, right? So tracking your expenses, when you're thinking about it as a form of mindfulness, you're bringing it to the forefront of your mind, and you're being aware of it, and that can be thought of as a form of mindfulness. So if that's a benefit to anybody, think of it as a form of mindfulness. So then, and so as you start tracking your expenses, you may notice that your food costs vary drastically, and maybe they're really expensive. Like Andrea just said, groceries are very expensive. So you may want to track your food at home and eating out differently to see where your food money is coming from. So if you're tracking your food, you can go even deeper into that when tracking your expenses to say, like, this is how much I'm spending at the grocery store. This is how much I'm spending eating out. This chart is actually from the USDA, and it shows different food plan costs depending on your family size. And then we just put a link in the chat to where you can access this information, and you can check it out for yourself. And then for those that live in a college campus and they have a meal plan, Make sure you're getting the most bang for your buck. You're utilizing it to its full capacity. And then you can check with your school to see if you can choose a lower cost option. If you find that the plan is too high for you or whatever it may be, start with a lower cost option at the beginning of the semester and maybe decrease that later on, depending on your individual needs and resources. But there's options out there. So my next chat question for you, if you are comfortable sharing, what do you think your biggest spending secret is? Or have you ever had buyer's remorse? And we'll talk about this, why I'm asking that here in a little bit. It plays into the spooked by spending idea. Stress shopping. Yes, that's mine. Yes, Amazon at work. Absolutely. So it's important to know all of these, right? For me, it kind of plays into the 3 that just all put in there. So for me, I get swept up and I get super excited about like sale weeks that are happening. There's one, without naming names, there's actually one happening right now, and that's the one that I'm guilty of. And I'm I know this about myself, and then that's something that I'm actually working on, and I'm conscious of it. So then I can look when I start tracking my expenses, I consciously know like this is how much I'm spending in this category, this category, and this category. I don't have room to take advantage of the sale week that's happening right now. So it's important to understand these things and these spending secrets and fears so that we can better understand and address them when talking about money and creating our own spending plan. Once again, bringing it to the forefront of our mind. So sometimes our financial fears stem from our spending secrets. Sometimes the secrets are small, like a low-key gum obsession, or my when I get super excited about the sales happening. Most people have something that they struggle with when it comes to finances. So identifying where you struggle with your spending plan can help you curb it and help you develop methods overcoming those temptations. Just being aware of it can help you. So when thinking about tracking expenses, here are some tips that we can give you. So we're talking about how everything's super individualistic. It depends on the person, right? So there's not going to be a one size fits all expense management method. So we talked about earlier how our needs and our wants are greatly determined by our lifestyle choices by the individual. It's important to remember this and try not to compare yourself to other people. So it's like comparing apples to oranges, right? Everybody's different. Everybody has different situations. And then the categories that you use to track your expenses can be as detailed or as broad as you want. Make it work for you. So that's what I talked about. If you're tracking your food, maybe you want to track your groceries and your eating out, because eating out can be so expensive sometimes. But if it's daunting at first, maybe just track your food and then dive deeper into it if you want to. And then when looking at all the different budgeting templates or different methods out there, it's important to remember that different organizations or companies that house these templates or budgeting methods, they may use different verbiage or different words for things. So like essential needs, that could be something, or financial goals, like savings or financial goals. Like they essentially can mean the same thing, but different words can be used. It's just important to know that. And then lastly, so we said that we talked about a little bit ago how we all have tried different methods, and maybe those are working for you and that's great and you can sustain them, but maybe they haven't. Don't give up if they haven't. Try a different method, revise and edit a method, personalize it to your situation and find something that works for you. It's just important to actually find out what your expenses are and budget so you can be aware of what's going on with your situation financially. So now I'm going to flip it back over to Andrea.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think that last point about if it's not working for you, try something different. We also want to reinforce you're not a failure if it didn't work out. It just didn't work for you, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just like Emily said, don't give up. Just try something different, and that's where a spending plan being flexible and focusing on flexibility can be empowering. So let's talk about some different ways to create and implement your own spending plan. So there are tons of different sample budget strategies out there. Lots of them exist. You might have heard of some of these. Nikki and I did a podcast episode specifically on all these different budgeting methods. So we're going to put that in the chat later. But the 50-20-30 rule is one that was introduced by Elizabeth Warren in a book several years ago, and that's come up several times on the internet. We're going to focus on that one a little bit, but some other ones you might have heard of are the zero-based budget by Peter Peyer, mental accounting or the no budget budget by Richard Thaler, the pay yourself first budget by George S. Clayson. There's also the 60% budget solution by Richard Jenkins. And then there's the traditional budgeting system that is basically just tracking your expenses and kind of defining things that way. But we go much more in depth in the podcast, so we're gonna put that in our chat as well. All right, so some people, they just want a recipe for how to get their financial lives in order, and that's where the 50-20-30 guide to budgeting was introduced in that book by Elizabeth Warren. And it's very popular on the internet, as I already mentioned. But we want to show you kind of how this may or may not work depending on your life stage or your income bracket. But so again, it's just a guide or template, and your own goals, values, needs, resources should be the basis for your budget or spending plan. So the first thing I want to highlight is we used consumer expenditure survey data from 2019 to calculate the actual spending averages for people in different life stages and income brackets. We're putting a link to the consumer expenditure survey in the chat as well for you to reference. But for our examples, we defined essential needs as those that are critical for covering your very basic costs like housing, groceries, utilities, healthcare, transportation. And this may include some contracted services that would cost more to turn off if you had a sudden loss of income, or resources that than to maintain that minimum payment. Discretionary spending for this includes more lifestyle spending, like what Emily mentioned earlier. It may be flexible, or it may include some contracted services that you could easily turn off. For example, your gas bill is an essential need. Your Netflix subscription is in the discretionary spending or wants category for this particular situation. Everyone is different. And then financial goals is probably the easiest category to define, since it includes retirement and other savings goals, as well as debt repayment. So in the 50-20-30 guide, essential needs makes up 50% of your take-home pay. That's the pay after taxes and other deductions have been taken out. 30% accounts for discretionary spending, and 20% goes to financial goals. Not all of the budgeting templates or spending plan strategies out there use take-home pay or net pay. Some of them use gross pay. So that's something to pay attention to when you're looking at these different budget options to get ideas. So for this example, we're showing the average mean percentage of actual spending for people under 25 on the left, and the percentage of actual spending for people between the ages of 45 and 54 on the right. Those are peak earners. People under 25 are usually just starting out in their careers, or they might still be in school, so they have much different set of resources and needs than our peak earners that are between the ages of 45 and 54. What you can't easily see from these charts are the income to expense ratios. So the average income for people under 25 was about $35,000 after taxes. It's $38,000 before taxes. But average spending is $39,000. So in this example, people under 25 are spending 103% of their income after taxes. So how are individuals in this age category covering all of their expenses, you might ask? Well, a lot of traditional college students, for example, are under the age of 25, and much of their income comes from student loans, which is debt. Additionally, government assistance may be taking care of some of those costs, like for food or if they're in subsidized housing. Average income for people between the ages of 45 and 54 in this survey was $91,000 after taxes, $107,000 before taxes, but their spending came in at only 71% of their income after taxes. So this is just to really clarify that not all strategies are going to work for all individuals when it comes to creating a spending plan. This is just an example. So for a little more extreme example of the differences in spending, we're looking at poverty, low income, and high income spending percentages for net pay. For individuals making less than $15,000, 245% of their income goes towards essential needs. 86% goes towards discretionary spending, and 7% goes towards financial goals. That doesn't exactly align with the 50-20-30 guide. For low income individuals, that's those that are making between $30,000 and $39,999 every year. 82% of their income goes to essential needs and 29% goes to discretionary spending, which only leaves 6% to go towards financial goals like debt repayment and saving. For high income individuals, those making over $200,000 or more each year, that 50-20-30 guide is a little more realistic. However, spending on essential needs is 32%. Discretionary spending is 92% or 19%, not 92%. And financial goals, as we've defined them here as retirement savings, is 11%. So individuals at the poverty level have an average income of $7,000, almost $8,000, but their average spending is around $26,000. Again, government assistance programs are probably making up for this rather large income gap, but people in this category that may use loans to pay for some of their essential needs may never climb out of that debt, since the amount of money that they have to devote to financial goals is almost non-existent. And on the other hand, our highest income group averages an annual income of over $258,000 every year and only spend about $160,000. So that leaves a lot actually that ends up in the savings or financial goals category that isn't specifically categorized from the consumer expenditure survey. All right, so considerations for your spending plan or using a budget guide. Spending ratios are going to differ by age or income bracket. Everyone's situation is different. Life stages will significantly impact your spending options, choices, needs. And it's also important to look at cost of living differences when you're looking to move and what that transition means for your finances. And you always want to prioritize essential needs like food and shelter first before you prioritize some of those other wants or discretionary spending choices. So we've done a whole series of podcast episodes that Nikki and I have on housing this year, on making sense of money. So if you're interested in this topic, you can check out some of the links that Quibena just shared in the chat. And then we also wanted to point out that good spending plans have a couple things in common. There is an expense tracking element. This helps inform your behavior and is informed by your behavior and your values. You can make data-driven decisions that are a little more realistic since you've been tracking kind of your behaviors. The different categories of spending is defined by your expense tracking or through your expense tracking, and that gives you more realistic distribution of your plan. There's also obviously a planning element, so you want to make sure you have goals set, but you're also flexible with them. Having an emergency fund set aside, if that's not something you already have, having a goal to establish an emergency fund will be important. Retirement funding is also important, especially as more employers have defined contribution rather than defined benefit plans. You also want to think about your time horizon for goals. Is it a short-term goal or a long-term goal? You also want to decide on which financial tools are best for accomplishing your spending plan or managing your budget. This includes the types of accounts you're using, what types of insurance you're using, what even types of mobile apps or physical calendars or notebooks you're using to track things. And again, we can't stress enough the flexibility. You want to regularly check in on your progress and make adjustments as needed to your plan. All right, so there are a few ways to cut your spending if you identify that that is something that you want to do. You want to look at your lower dollar costs because those small amounts add up. See if there are small, frequent choices that you're making that you can modify a little bit. You also want to look at what's in your wallet. Do you know yourself that you will spend more with cash or with credit? And then make it a little bit more difficult to get a hold of whatever financial tool enables spontaneous spending, so you can control that a little bit easier. If you are thinking about a spontaneous spending choice, maybe thinking about it in the terms of how long you have to work to afford that choice, or how much of a high value budget item or category it will cost you. For instance, when I'm thinking about a large cost, I will sometimes think about it in the context of how many months of my cell phone bill would this cover, right? And thinking about it from that perspective. All right, so another method of cutting expenses is the step down method. So instead of completely cutting something out, which is very difficult to you because it involves behavior change, you might think about stepping down. Maybe instead of going out to get fancy coffee 4 times a week, you do it 2 times a week. And so you're cutting it from an $80 cost to a $40 cost, and then eventually down to maybe 1 time a week you treat yourself to a $20 meal or something. So think about, instead of cutting something out completely and getting frustrated because you're not able to, you stress spend on eating out every day, or there's different things that instigate our spending choices. You might look at ways to step down regular spending choices. So a few things you want to watch out for in your spending plan or your budget is if your spending plan results in a negative number. That's not a good plan. You wanna see where there's opportunities to adjust, or you might have to look at ways to increase your income, right? It might not just be cutting expenses. It might be looking at ways to diversify or change your income. Maybe it means a job change, right? So thinking about it from that perspective. You might also realize you're forgetting to include certain categories, so that other category might keep expanding, and so you want to look at, maybe you need to have more clearly defined subcategories so you can identify where some of your spending variance is going. Sometimes underestimating costs or overestimating your income and resources might contribute to some budget difficulties or spending plan difficulties. If you're overestimating your income, it might be because you have a lot of variance in your income. We talked about income volatility. Maybe you need to look at a broader time frame to see what the average actually is normally for your income potential. Again, the income volatility comes with variations in spending and income from different life transitions as well. Maybe you move, maybe you change jobs, maybe you get a new puppy, maybe you expand your family. All of those can contribute to changes in your spending, as well as sometimes your income. So I already mentioned the too much money in the other category and how to address that as well. So the reasons that we might want to reprioritize our spending plan, there's lots of different reasons out there. Regardless of that, you want to make sure that your spending plan is flexible and that you can adjust it based on how your goals might change, your life situation and circumstances change. Something that you really valued 10 years ago, you may not value as much anymore, or may have shifted because we live dynamic lives and we have things that change. So there are lots of things that you can do to reprioritize your spending plan and reasons why you might do that. So a couple reminders: you want to spend less than you earn. You want to prioritize saving to accomplish specific goals. You want to remember that if you're using student loans as an income source now, it turns into a debt later. It always maintains a debt, but it might be income now and it turns into debt later. You want to make sure that you are adjusting your plan to match what your needs are, and that includes what tools you're using to track your spending. So just be flexible. Our next webinar is Don't Get Phished, Avoid Scams and Fraud. There's a lot of examples of scams and fraud out there right now, and that will be on November 8th. So make sure to check that out. You can also watch some of our previous webinars on YouTube, which we will also post this webinar to once it is recorded and captioned. And you can stay in contact with us through lots of different ways. So we put that in the chat as well. So we'll stay on for a few more minutes to answer any questions that you want to put in the chat or the Q&A feature. And we will record those answers as well and put them out to anyone that registered for today's webinar. But if you have somewhere to go, you have people to see, you have lunch to catch up on, you can go ahead and log off. But we'll stay on a few more minutes if you have questions. Thank you. Have a fabulous afternoon.